Terrific. Thanks so much for your insights. Psychiatrist and author Tanveer Ahmed. And after the break, Desert Island Discs with the Swedish Baron.
And now on Miranda Devine, Desert Island Discs.
Each week we ask a special guest to choose 3 songs they would take with them if they were cast away on a desert island. Tonight our castaway is Independent Senator David Leyonhjelm, one of the powerful crossbench senators who can make or break the Abbott government. He is a Libertarian, a vet, a lawyer, a self-made businessman and a Swedish baron who likes Leonard Cohen. Welcome to 2GB, David.
Good evening.
Are you really a Swedish baron?
I am in Sweden. But unfortunately, there's no estates or money or slaves or anything useful like that to come with it. But yes, technically I am. But I have to say though that all the males with my surname, it's not just the firstborn, is a baron, and all the females until they get married and change their name are also baronesses. So it's kind of a diffuse honour, if you like. And
what does Leyonhjelm mean in Swedish?
It means lion on a helmet.
Ah, right.
And my ancestors in Sweden were soldiers, and one of them was made a baron by the King of Sweden back in the 19th century, I think it was. And I don't know whether they changed their name then or it goes back to the Viking days, but obviously fairly ferocious sort of history.
Well, I guess you need to have some of that spirit of your ancestors with the kind of ferocious battles that you're waging now in politics. Now, tomorrow Parliament's back and the new Speaker will be chosen by the Liberal Party room. Do you have any view about who it ought to be?
No, I've been watching with some interest the candidates putting up their hands, and to be quite honest, I've been wondering why on earth they're volunteering. Once you're a speaker, you're kind of out of the hurly-burly of politics. You get lots of perks and a big salary, so perhaps that's the attraction. But
not so many perks now, I think.
That's not as many. No, that's right. But I don't know. I'm not sure that I'd want to be Speaker if I was in their position. I'd like to think that I can make a difference to what legislation goes through Parliament, and I think the Speaker's pretty much outside that. They can certainly determine, the process that occurs within the chamber, but that's about the limit, I think.
Now, what about the perks of politicians flying their children around business class at taxpayer expense? Does that pass the pub test?
No, it doesn't. It's not a black and white issue. I have to say I found dealing with the allowances situation, what's allowable, what's not allowable, one of the most difficult things about being a new senator. My office and I have struggled a lot to get our heads around it. We had a briefing by the Department of Finance before I was actually sworn in, and they went through what was available, what we could do. But when it came to the reasons for spending money, for going places, there were 2 grounds. One is parliamentary activities and the other one is electorate activities. And when we said, well, what are they? How do you define them? The answer was, well, whatever you think they are, if you can, as long as it'll pass the front page test, which is not very much help. Taking your kids on holiday, I'm not comfortable at all with that either.
Especially business class.
Yeah, especially business class.
Well, nobody in the business community does that.
No, I agree. They don't. I often compare what we're able to do with what I used to do when I was in the corporate world. And, some of the things are over the top. On the other hand, I think there's probably a case for, at least occasionally, bringing the kids to Canberra, especially some of the politicians who live a long way away. Western Australia, for example, they can be in Canberra for a fortnight if they don't get home on the weekend. If they have little kids, I know some of them have discussed it with me. They miss their kids terribly, and bringing them to Canberra to see Dad or sometimes Mum at work is not a bad way of sort of reassuring them that life is still normal.
Now, how do you think Tony Abbott is going? There's a poll out today that's showing he's gone backwards since these expenses stories have hit the front page. And as preferred Prime Minister now, Bill Shorten is 17 points ahead. How can that be?
Yes, I don't know. I despair. I think about the only thing that I'd say, though, about the Liberal government is they're better than the Shorten government. When I try to look for some objective reasons to praise them, I'm struggling. I think they're a very great disappointment, and it just never ends. Leaving the Bronwyn Bishop thing going for 3 weeks was ridiculous. We now got a decision to build ships in South Australia for naked political reasons, not necessarily the right ships or the best ships or the best value for taxpayers' money, but in order to shore up electorates in South Australia. But then on the other hand, we've got Bill Shorten trying to head off the Greens by saying we're going to have 50% renewable energy when it costs heaps more than traditional energy, and will cripple our manufacturing and push up the price of electricity for everybody. I despair. They really, both sides have lost the plot, and I can understand that Abbott's losing support, but losing support in favour of Shorten, that makes even less sense.
Now, if you were to give the Prime Minister advice, what would it be?
He's just not making the case especially for economic reform. I mean, it started with the first budget last year. I mean, we do have a budget problem, and we're spending too much money. The debate should not be about increasing taxes, negative gearing, superannuation changes, all that sort of stuff. All they are various forms of raising taxes. We have to be reducing expenditure, and we've got an expenditure problem. But nobody from the government side, with occasional voices heard, but broadly speaking, nobody from the government side is making the case. They're sort of wringing their hands saying, what can we do? And because they think they can't make the case, they then go for the populist approach, and we had this year's budget, which was basically a damn squib. I think Abbott is a very good persuader. But for some reason or other, and I don't know whether it's his office, his chief of staff, or he just doesn't trust his own judgment, or what it is, he's just not out there making the case. He's not an economics man, so perhaps he doesn't feel confident about making it, but I'm sure he can be given enough lines to sound as if he knows what he's talking about. We've got an economic problem. If we don't solve it, we'll end up heading in the direction of Greece, or even America for that matter. They've got a bigger budget problem than we've got, but at least they're starting to come out of their problem, where ours is getting worse month by month. And I'd like to see him start engaging with the Australian public and it's not just one interview, it's time after time after time. The old saying about advertising is it's only starting to work at the time when you're hardly sick of it. And that he needs to take a bit of a leaf out of the world of advertising and just start repeating the message.
Now let's have some music, Senator Leyonhjelm. What's your first musical choice?
My first one is a Leonard Cohen song sung by Anthony Hegarty. I don't know very much about Anthony Hegarty. All I know is he sings Leonard Cohen's song, If It Be Your Will, brilliantly well. I'm a huge fan of Leonard Cohen. I think in times to come he'll be remembered as our modern day, Oscar Wilde, or he is a poet, a songwriter, and an absolute genius, and I'm a total fan. But some of his songs are actually better off sung by other people, and If It Be Your Will is one of them.
From this broken hill, know your praises they shall ring. If it be your will to let me sing.
You're listening to Miranda Devine on Desert Island Discs, speaking to Independent Senator David Leyonhjelm, and that was his first song, If It Be Your Will, by, it's a Leonard Cohen song sung by Anthony Hegarty. Now let's go back to the beginning, David Leyonhjelm. You were born the eldest of 4 children to Brian and Jean Leyonhjelm and raised on a small dairy farm in Victoria. Tell us about your childhood.
I don't want to overstate it because everybody says this, but we were poor. It wasn't a particularly big farm, but my memories of it were milking cows, feeding calves. We had also sheep, a few beef cattle. I remember carting hay during the summer break from school. Never enough money, but I had a lot of fun on weekends catching tadpoles and wandering around the farm. I bought my first watch from the proceeds of trapping rabbits. But we moved to Melbourne. My father sold the farm, moved to Melbourne when I was, I think, coming up to 13. And he managed a farm on the outskirts of Melbourne. That didn't work out very well, and he went off managing other farms, and a couple of years after that my parents separated. So I spent the rest of my life basically with my mother, and with my father nowhere to be found.
And what sort of an impact do you think that childhood had on you? You became very self-reliant, I guess.
Yes. You have to sort of pick yourself up and get on with things. What it left me with was a lifelong interest in agriculture, farming. So I ended up after high school. Obviously, I went to Melbourne University and did a veterinary degree. Became a veterinarian. I was in practice for some years, and then I joined the animal health pharmaceutical industry, working for companies selling sheep drenches and sheep dips and things like that. I did that for something like 6 years. I moved from the technical area in those companies to the marketing area, so I became part of the business management side. Then after I had a couple of years as a public servant, which was a bit of a failure, I have to say.
But an eye-opener, I'll bet.
Yes, it basically was a negative experience, shall we say.
Yeah.
And I then established my own company, an agribusiness consulting company, and I still have that. So 26 years later, I still have that business. We never got to more than about 5 staff, but it was very, very successful and did quite well. And it's still going. It's just down to me, my wife, and a couple of casual staff. Now I've had to downsize it since becoming a senator.
But when did you become interested in politics then, and all this other busy work that you were doing?
Well, I always have been interested in politics. I joined Young Labor back when I was still a student. The Vietnam War was on. There was a danger that people my age would be conscripted, and I was very opposed to that idea. There were people being arrested for undertaking abortions in Victoria at that time, which I thought was very unfair. And so the various social issues at the time sort of convinced me that the government was not doing the right thing, and that the way to fix that was through politics.
But why didn't you become a lefty like so many others of your generation with those same attitudes?
I think I probably was a lefty. At least I thought I should be a lefty, because I thought only lefties were socially liberal. So only lefties believe in freedom of choice, for example, a woman's right to choose on abortion. Only the lefties were opposed to conscription in those days. So I thought, well, I must be a lefty on economic grounds as well. After a bit of international travel, I realised that I wasn't a lefty on economic grounds. Well, there is a saying that if you're not a socialist at 20, you've got no heart, but if you're still a socialist at 40, you've got no brain.
So true.
Yeah. So I suppose by that standard, I've got both a heart and brains, because after sort of growing up, earning a bit of money, travelling to countries that were purportedly socialist, it dawned on me pretty quickly that being a lefty on economic grounds was not a very smart thing at all. But I never lost my social liberalism, if you like, my belief that there were things that weren't the government's business, and the government should stay out of them. And so
So, and that's one of, as a libertarian, one of, I guess, the defining characteristics of your policies is this idea of freedom. And particularly, I like what you say about the nanny state. And you've, in fact, instituted an inquiry into all the rules and regulations that bound us up. And I'll just give one example. You know, tomorrow in New South Wales, prisoners in jails are no longer allowed to smoke. How crazy is that?
Yes, that's right. It is crazy, and in fact it was responsible for a riot in Victoria when they did it.
Yeah, $10 million worth of damage.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the nanny state, in the way that we think of it these days, is the government stopping you from doing things for your own good. The harm principle, the John Stuart Mill idea, is that the government has a role to prevent harm to other people. And so if you're in danger of harming somebody else, or you actually harm somebody else, then the justice system can step in and the government can have something to do with that. But when it's just you that's being harmed through your own choices, that's nanny state, and that's what this inquiry is all about. And as a libertarian, that's where I think the government goes too far. So smoking is a very good example. You can argue that the government may have a role to prevent harm from secondary smoking. So if you're sitting around puffing smoke in other people's faces, and that as a result of that they get sick, then the government may have a role in that. Now, we got way past that years ago, to the point where, first of all, it was just, it's just annoying. Other people's smoke is annoying people, so that was sufficient grounds to sort of say, well, now you've got to go outside. But then it became, well, you can't smoke within 10 metres of a schoolyard or allowed to smoke in a bus shelter when there's absolutely no prospect whatsoever of you harming anybody else. And it's just simply based on disapproval. I don't like what you're doing, therefore I'm going to prohibit it. And smoking in prisons, of course, is just an extension of the same thing. You know, we want prisoners to conform to our idea of what responsible members of community should do. Responsible members of community wouldn't smoke, therefore let's prevent them from smoking in prison. That's about as far as their thinking goes. But an absolute classic example of nanny state intervention is bicycle helmets. Australia and New Zealand are the only two countries in the world, as I understand it, that have made it compulsory for people riding bicycles to wear a helmet. You can go right through Europe, and Europe has, some nanny state efforts as well, but you can go right through Europe and see people riding bicycles in their millions. And with the exception of children, and even then, not always, you see very few helmets. Now, I think that's really good. It's good that people choose to wear a helmet, say when they're doing racing, and they're travelling at high speed, and if they come off, they're likely to really injure themselves. It's good that parents take responsibility for their littlies and put helmets on them, because little heads are easier to injure. They suffer more injury if they do come off. But it's not the government telling them. It's people choosing for themselves to do something that might be quite sensible. I think that's quite appropriate. Here in Australia, we say, well, we don't think you're sensible enough to make these decisions for yourself. We're going to force you to wear a helmet whether you think you need one or not.
So let's have some more music now, David Leyonhjelm. What are we going to hear now?
My second choice is a song sung by Maria Callas from Norma. I can't actually remember its name.
Custodiva.
Custodiva, that's it, yes. Norma's not a brilliant opera from a story point of view, but the opera by Bellini has a couple of superb arias in it, and this one is one of my favourites. And Maria Callas is also one of my favourite soprano singers. I'm a great enthusiast of opera, and but Maria Callas wasn't always brilliant, but this particular example of her was great. And after what I found is that as I've developed my interest in opera, I've been able to distinguish between good sopranos and mediocre sopranos, and the same with tenors. And I think this is a particularly good example of Maria at her best. and at her best, she was a very, very good soprano.
You're listening to Miranda Devine on Desert Island Discs, speaking to Independent Senator David Leyonhjelm. Now, David, let's talk about love. You've been with your de facto wife, Amanda, for 30 years. How did you meet?
31 years now.
31 years?
Yes. We met playing Trivial Pursuit at a friend's house. I think she got drunk and I didn't get that drunk, but I still don't remember all the details, so perhaps I was a little bit drunk. I don't quite know what was attractive, why we were attracted to each other. It is, people would tell me that it is fairly remarkable that we decided not to have children and yet we're still together after 31 years. But there must be something in it, I suppose.
So why did you make that decision?
I was, at the time I was single, but I had started my MBA, and I was sort of thinking, this is ridiculous. I'm sacrificing study time to meet girls, and I made a decision. When I meet a nice one, instead of thinking I can do better than this, I'll keep her. And I don't think I was as cold-hearted as that at the time I met Amanda, but there was something like that was playing in the back of my mind. You know, stop being silly. You've got study to do. It's time you stop being so picky about your girlfriends. And when you meet one that you're happy with, don't sort of keep looking over the fence as I had done in the past.
As a lot of men do, yeah.
As a lot of men do, and there's nothing more complicated than that. I think she was probably at a sort of similar stage in her life. So rather than have children, we decided we liked cats. We have had cats in our household ever since we've been together, and we now have 4. And I think the Americans have a term for people with cats. They call them fur babies.
Right.
And I think it's probably pretty appropriate in our case.
You're pretty mad about the cats, aren't you?
Yes, well, I like them. I like dogs as well. I wouldn't have been a veterinarian if I hadn't liked pets. I've had them all my life, both cats and dogs, and I do like dogs too. But cats have a certain appeal about them. You know, the old saying is, dogs have masters and cats have servants. It kind of appeals to me. Cats are independent. They don't have to be walked. When they don't want anything to do with you, they'll make themselves scarce. When they want to be patted, they'll come and tell you. They really appeal to me. They're quite individualistic too. As a libertarian, I like individualism rather than collectivism. And dogs, like to hang around in packs, whereas cats are very individual. So I don't know if there's a political theme to it, or it's just my natural personality coming out here. But yes, I like cats, and we normally have had 2. But our next-door neighbour, who we were very close to, had to go to Turkey to look after her elderly mother before she died, and she'd acquired 2 kittens while we were living next door to her, and we'd seen them as kittens and watched them growing up, and they were only a couple of years old, and she didn't know what to do with them when she was leaving to go to Turkey. And so what could we do? We had to take them. So we've now got 4 cats. Now,
you introduced a bill for same-sex marriage, and yet you yourself have never got married. Why is that?
Yes. I've never got married. I'm not a great fan of the institution of marriage. I just can't see why you need a piece of paper from the government to say that you're married. It has major significance to some people. It's never had that significance to me. and especially when if you take it out of the religious domain, which I have a huge respect for, and just turn it into a piece of paper issued by the government and it's registered, then I just can't quite see the point of it. So I'm no great fan of marriage for that reason. I'm not religious.
Now, you're also, I wanted to ask you about guns, because I know you were an avid gun collector and you're an avid target shooter. But when John Howard banned semi-automatic rifles after the Port Arthur massacre, you were furious. Why was that?
Yes. Well, look, I suppose it's one of the most egregious examples of collective punishment I've ever seen. You are a danger to other people whether or not you have a gun. And the assumption that having a gun makes you dangerous is profoundly wrong.
But we haven't had any of those similar massacres since then, and America has them, every other week.
America does, but New Zealand didn't ban semi-automatics at the time when Australia did, and it hasn't had any massacres either. And America's actually a very bad comparison. They're an entirely different culture. And the truth is also that they have been liberalising their gun laws for the last 20 years or so, and over that period they've also had a very substantial decline in gun-related violence. The comparison with America, which most people make, there's way more to it than just more guns.
So what's next for David Leyonhjelm? What do you hope to achieve at the end of your political career?
Well, my party has given me very firm instructions. I am not to lose the seat. I will be running again in 5 years' time to hold the seat, although I will be getting close to 70 by that stage. So my expectation is I wouldn't serve a full term. I'd hand it over to another member of my party. We're also aiming to win more seats at the next election, whenever that is, 15 months or so, we're around about, I assume. We're hoping that the awareness that there is an alternative, that you don't have to be a lefty to be socially liberal, you don't have to be a cold-hearted conservative to be economically responsible, that the Libertarian way is get the government out of your pocket and off your back is a good alternative. Now, if I've done my job correctly, we might win another 1 or 2 or 3 more Senate seats at the next election. So that's the plan. We are, I suppose, trying to achieve for Australia what we think the Liberal government should be doing, and that is be liberal. And we actually have a little saying that says Libertarians are plotting to take over the world and leave you alone.
Terrific. And let's go to your third and final musical choice now, Senator Leyonhjelm.
It's A Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum. I don't know why I love it. It just brings back memories of years ago when I knew absolutely every song by heart that was ever played on the radio, and this one was one of my favourites. I know quite a number of the Procol Harum songs, but and I nearly chose one that was less well known, but I thought people would probably remember this one better.
Terrific. Thanks so much for joining us on Desert Island Discs, Senator Leyonhjelm.
My pleasure.
We skip the light fandango, turns cartwheels across the floor. I was feeling kind of seasick. The crowd called out for more. The room was humming harder as the ceiling flew away. When we call out for another drink, the waiter brought a tray, and so it was that later, as the miller told his tale, that her face at first just ghostly turned the whiter shade of pale. at first just ghostly. Turn the wider shade of fair.
It's 4 minutes to 8, and that's just about it from me. And before we go, I wanted to pay tribute to a young ballet dancer from MacDonald College, that wonderful performing arts school in North Strathfield. Well, on Sunday night, Year 10 student Harrison Lee won the Sydney Eisteddfod Ballet Scholarship at the Opera House with an absolutely superb performance that wowed the judges and the audience. For a 16-year-old to execute every pirouette and jump to perfection is quite some feat. So remember that name, Harrison Lee from MacDonald College. He will go a long way. And Bruce has written to me on the email. He says, we have a whole generation who've been taught in history that Australians are racist. I did a church study group on Manning Clark's version of Australian history in 1984. It almost fooled me, but my background slowly returned perspective to my thinking. And Brian writes, I take my hat off to you. You are navigating a difficult topic. This is on same-sex marriage, which is not popular if your views are the opposite. Most of level-headed Australians refrain from commenting because you will be labelled the worst homophobic creature in this world. Yep, just for having a contrary point of view. And Nick writes, great interview with Anthony Dillon. He is correct when he says media and the inner-city elitists hunting for racism are responsible for the goods row. Problem is, these inner-city folk hear one Indigenous activist speak and presume to believe that the activist speaks for all Aboriginals. And Barbara says, well, she's rude about saintly Senator Nick Xenophon. We won't go on with that. Monica says, again, it was great to hear Mr. Dillon speak tonight, and he brings rationality and balance to the debate. Same time, same place next week. Stay tuned now for The Wedding Show.